Right. So here is case 6 to look at that. Right. How African businesses could use Harris and Crowther's model of responsibility. Yeah, so a set of recommendations required in terms of the model. So when we look at Crowther's model, I think it has those 4 quadrants that you would focus on. So it starts off obviously with your internal focus. So here we look obviously after our shareholders and our employees, but also we external focus where we show concern for societies and the natural environment, and then short and long-term focus. Short-term focus would be what can we do from a profitability perspective. Long-term focus is how can we become sustainable in terms of those triple bottom line and quadruple bottom line elements. So you can discuss each of these. The finance quadrant, always important. We have to look after the interests of our shareholders, but not at the expense of the future. So you then start looking at your impact on society. And although it is a short-term focus, it's about addressing immediate needs, but with the intention of building momentum towards the future. An organization culture is obviously reflected through people saying that's how we do business around here. But it really is about building into your corporate culture the fact that society is important, that we have a role to play inside communities, that we have a role to play when it comes to the natural environment. And the environmental quadrant is very much making sure that we have a planet that we can hand over to future generations. So I think the key thing is you create this scorecard and you look at it from a strategy perspective, and how can we build in those elements into strategy? How can we build those elements in while still making the right amounts of profitability? How do we distribute the benefits in this organization, and what technology do we require to make each of those quadrants a reality? The second question, okay, yeah, statutory obligations in terms of South Africa. There are lots of statutory stuff. Obviously, it starts with the vision in South Africa of this idea of a sustainable, economically prosperous and self-reliant nation. I think we're incredibly far away from it. The way we get there is always going to be through your quadruple bottom line elements. So in terms of the statutory obligations, it starts with the Constitution, and in the Constitution, there is this specific line that talks about a secure and that talks about secure and ecologically sustainable development. So the focus is always around the quadruple bottom line. And in order to be able to do that, we need to look after our profits. We need to look after our planet. We need to look after our people, and we need to look after the purpose of the organization. So in terms of the Constitution then creates the platform for us to set up the following pieces of legislation. There are tons of these legislation all around, particularly, again, looking after the natural environment, empowering in terms of communities and people, and then also focusing very much on looking after the interests of your shareholders. And there you have your Companies Act doing that. Guys, and then just, I think it is not a statutory requirement, but it is a very important set of guidelines in terms of becoming sustainable. And just remember, guys, it's always about the quadruple bottom line. You need to focus on all of those elements when you discuss the statutes. And then question 3, and then possible challenges for sustainability. There are tons of sustainability. We've known for a long time that climate change is real and that we've been warned around climate change. However, there still appears to be this notion that it's far more important to be profitable than sustainable. The focus has very much always been on short term rather than long term. So we've seen the kind of trade-offs having to be made. How much do we worry about the natural environment? How much do we worry about profits? And I think the challenges is how do we look after the interests of our shareholders while still looking after the interests of the natural environment, while still behaving ethically, while still also looking after societies. So from a business case perspective, I think sometimes it's difficult to convince boards of directors and shareholders of the importance of being socially responsible, of looking after the natural environment and creating that balance between ethicality and the other three P's in the quadruple bottom line. So it's about profits, but it's not at the expense of sustainability. Guys, and then just for employees, I think employees need to know that we are there to look after the interests, as long as they look after the interests of the organization, and getting management and employees on the same page in terms of how we view profitability versus the other three elements becomes very important. And that is that.